The gunshot that shattered the evening calm sent Willa Zimmerman diving behind the water trough outside her father's general store, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst right through her chest. Tucumcari, New Mexico in 1883 was supposed to be civilized now, or at least that was what the newspaper kept claiming. But somebody forgot to tell the drunk cowboys who rode through town every Saturday night looking for trouble. She pressed herself against the rough wooden planks, her fingers clutching the fabric of her plain brown dress, listening to the shouts and the thunder of hooves as they finally faded down the dusty street. When silence returned, she stood slowly, brushing dirt from her skirts, and found herself staring directly into the bluest eyes she had ever seen. "You all right, miss?" The cowboy stood just a few feet away, his hat in his hands, concern etched across a face that looked like it had been carved from sun-bronzed stone. He was tall, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and there was something gentle in the way he held himself despite the gun belt slung low on his hips. "I'm fine." Willa straightened her spine, trying to recover some dignity. At 22, she should have been married by now, settled with children of her own, but life had other plans. Her mother had died 5 years ago, and someone needed to help her father run the store. Someone needed to keep the books and mind the customers and make sure the shelves stayed stocked. There had never been time for courtship, never been space in her carefully ordered life for anything as frivolous as romance. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Xavier Pritchard, madam. Most folks just call me Xave." He had a voice like warm honey, smooth and sweet with just a hint of Texas in the vowels. "I'm real sorry about those boys. They're from the Double R Ranch, and they get a little wild when they've had too much whiskey." "I suppose that makes it acceptable then." She heard the sharp edge in her own voice and immediately regretted it. The man was only trying to be kind. "Forgive me. It's been a long day and I'm tired." He smiled, and it transformed his entire face, softening the hard edges and making him look younger. No apology needed. "You've got every right to be angry. A town isn't a shooting gallery, and those boys ought to remember it." He settled his hat back on his head. "You work at the store. My father owns it. Zimmerman's General Store." She gestured toward the building behind her. "We've been here since the railroad came through. Then I reckon I'll be seeing more of you. I just signed on as foreman at the Parker Spread, about 10 miles north of town. I expect I'll be coming in for supplies regular like." He touched the brim of his hat. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Miss Zimmerman, even under such strange circumstances." She watched him walk away, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step, and something shifted in her chest. It felt like the moment right before a thunderstorm, when the air gets heavy and charged with possibility. She shook her head, dismissing the foolish notion. Xavier Pritchard was just another cowboy, and she had learned long ago not to put stock in handsome faces and charming smiles. But he came back. 2 days later, he walked into the store with a list written in careful block letters, and she helped him gather flour and coffee and dried beans. He told her about growing up in Fort Worth, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about the way the stars looked different depending on where you were standing. She found herself telling him things too, small pieces of herself she usually kept locked away. How she loved to read but never had time, how she missed her mother's singing, how sometimes she stood on the porch in the evening and wondered what lay beyond the horizon. "You ever been dancing?" he asked as she wrapped his purchases in brown paper. The question caught her off guard. "Dancing?" "You know, at a social or a barn raising or something like that." He leaned against the counter, those blue eyes fixed on her face. "There's one this Saturday at the church. They're raising money for a new roof. I know about it." Everyone in Tucumcari knew about it. The whole town had been talking about nothing else for weeks. But I don't dance. Don't or can't. There was no mockery in his voice, only genuine curiosity. Heat crept up her neck. I never learned. My mother got sick right around the time girls usually start going to socials, and after that, there wasn't opportunity. It sounded pathetic even to her own ears, admitting that at 22 she had never danced with a man, had never done a lot of things that other women her age took for granted. Then let me teach you. He said it like it was the simplest thing in the world, as easy as breathing. Come to the dance on Saturday and I'll show you everything you need to know. I couldn't possibly. But even as she said it, something inside her yearned to say yes. Why not? He tilted his head, studying her. You scared? No. The word came out too quickly, too defensively. I just don't see the point. I have responsibilities. The store doesn't run itself. The store will be there on Sunday morning, same as it always is. His voice was soft now, persuasive. One evening, Miss Zimmerman. A few hours to be young and foolish. Don't you think you've earned that? She wanted to argue, wanted to list all the reasons why it was impossible, impractical, improper. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was, all right, I'll go. The smile he gave her could have lit up the entire territory. Saturday arrived too quickly and not quickly enough. Willa stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, staring at her reflection with a mixture of hope and dismay. She owned exactly 2 dresses suitable for a social gathering, and both were hopelessly outdated. She had finally settled on a dark green calico that had been her mother's, taking in the waist and letting down the hem until it fit reasonably well. Her dark blonde hair, usually pulled back in a severe bun, hung in soft waves around her shoulders. She looked different. She realized with a start, almost pretty. You look beautiful, pumpkin. Her father appeared in the doorway, his weathered face creasing into a smile. Walter Zimmerman had aged considerably since his wife's death, his hair going white and his shoulders developing a permanent stoop, but his eyes were still sharp and kind. Your mother would be so happy to see you going out having fun. I feel ridiculous. Willa turned away from the mirror. I'm too old to be acting like some silly girl with her first beau. You're never too old for happiness. He crossed the room and took her hands in his. I know you've sacrificed a lot to help me these past years, and I'm grateful for it. But it's time you started living your own life, making your own choices. This cowboy who's been coming around, he seems like a good man. You've noticed him. I may be old, but I'm not blind, he chuckled. He looks at you like you hung the moon. And unless I'm very much mistaken, you look at him the same way. Did she? Willa pressed her hands to her warm cheeks, remembering the way her pulse quickened every time Xavier walked through the door, the way she found herself watching for him on the days he usually came to town. Maybe her father was right. Maybe it was time to stop hiding behind duty and responsibility and admit that she wanted something more. The church hall was already crowded when they arrived, filled with the entire population of Tucumcari and half the surrounding ranches. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting warm golden light over the assembled crowd. A small group of musicians had set up in the corner, tuning their fiddles and guitars. Women clustered in groups, their dresses a rainbow of colors, while men gathered near the punch bowl, talking in low voices about cattle prices and weather patterns. Willa felt suddenly exposed, certain that everyone was staring at her, judging her foolishness. She was about to turn and flee when she saw Xavier making his way through the crowd toward her. He wore clean denim pants and a white shirt that made his tanned skin look even darker. His hair was neatly combed, though one rebellious curl had already escaped to fall across his forehead. You came. He sounded genuinely relieved, as if he had been worried she might change her mind. You look absolutely beautiful. Thank you. The words came out barely above a whisper. "I wasn't sure I would, but my father convinced me. Then I owe him my thanks." Xavier offered his arm. "Come on. Let's get you something to drink before the music starts." He guided her through the crowd, stopping to introduce her to people she had seen in the store but never really talked to. There was Martha Collins from the boarding house, who had a laugh like church bells. Tom Bradley, who ran the livery stable and told terrible jokes. Sarah and James Peterson, newlyweds who couldn't stop holding hands. Everyone was friendly, welcoming, and Willa began to relax despite herself. Then the music started, a lively reel that had couples flooding onto the dance floor. Willa watched them move together, bodies swaying in time to the fiddles, and her chest tightened with anxiety. She couldn't do that. She would trip over her own feet, make a fool of herself in front of the entire town. "Hey!" Xavier's hand found hers, his fingers warm and steady. "Look at me, not them." She dragged her gaze away from the dancing couples to meet his eyes. He was smiling that gentle smile that made her feel like she was the only person in the room. "We don't have to do anything fancy," he said. "Just a simple waltz. I'll lead and all you have to do is follow. Trust me." Did she trust him? She barely knew him. They had only spoken a handful of times, brief conversations across the store counter. But something in his eyes, something in the careful way he held her hand made her nod. "Good girl." He led her onto the floor as the reel ended and a slower song began. The fiddle sang out sweet and mournful, and he placed one hand on her waist, keeping her other hand clasped in his. "Put your free hand on my shoulder. That's it. Now just feel the music and let me guide you." He began to move, slow and sure, and Willa followed. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. She stumbled slightly, stepping on his boot, but he just smiled and kept going. The room spun around them, other dancers blurring into streaks of color. Xavier never took his eyes off her face, never let her feel anything but safe in his arms, and then something miraculous happened. Her body began to understand the rhythm, her feet finding the pattern without conscious thought. The music swelled, and suddenly she was dancing, really dancing, moving with Xavier like they had been doing this all their lives. Her heart soared. She felt weightless, untethered, as if her feet had left the ground entirely. She was flying, held aloft by the music and the strength of Xavier's arms around her. "You're doing it." His voice was full of wonder and pride. "You're a natural. I don't want it to stop." The confession tumbled out before she could stop it. "I feel like if we stop moving, I'll fall." "Then we won't stop." He pulled her closer, until there was barely any space between them at all. "We'll just keep dancing until the sun comes up." They danced through 3 more songs before the musicians took a break, and even then, Willa felt drunk on the joy of it. Xavier led her outside to cool off, and they stood in the darkness behind the church, breathing hard and grinning at each other like children who had gotten away with something wonderful. "Thank you," Willa said, "for teaching me, for being patient. Thank you for trusting me." He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I knew you could do it. I knew the moment I saw you that there was something special about you, Willa Zimmerman." No one had ever said her name like that before, like it was something precious. She swayed toward him without meaning to, drawn by a force she didn't fully understand. His hand cupped her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone, and she thought he might kiss her, wanted him to kiss her. But then voices drifted from around the corner, and they sprang apart like guilty children. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of music and laughter. Xavier danced with her again and again, until her feet ached and her sides hurt from smiling. Other men asked for dances too, but Xavier never went far, always keeping her in his line of sight. When the night finally ended and people began drifting toward their homes and wagons, He walked her and her father back to the store. "Can I call on you?" he asked as they stood on the porch. "Properly, I mean, not just when I need supplies. I'd like that." She was amazed at how steady her voice sounded when her insides were doing somersaults. "I'd like that very much. Tomorrow, then. I'll come by after church." She watched him walk away, his figure eventually swallowed by the darkness, and pressed her hand to her chest. Her heart was still racing, still caught in the rhythm of the dance. She felt changed, transformed, as if dancing with Xavier Pritchard had opened a door she had not even known existed. The next weeks were the happiest Willa had ever known. Xavier came to town every few days, always with some excuse about needing supplies or checking on a horse at the livery. They would walk together down by the creek that ran behind the town, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his dreams of owning his own ranch someday, a place with good grass and clear water where he could raise horses. She confessed her secret desire to travel, to see the ocean and the mountains and all the places she had only read about in books. "Why don't you?" he asked one afternoon as they sat on a fallen log, watching the water tumble over smooth stones. "How could I? There's the store and my father needs help." "Your father is stronger than you think." Xavier picked up a pebble and tossed it into the creek, "and he wants you to be happy." "He told me so himself." "He talked to you." Willa felt a flutter of panic and pleasure mixed together. "I asked his permission to court you proper." Xavier turned to face her, his expression serious. "I know we haven't known each other long, but I need you to understand something, Willa. I'm falling in love with you. Actually, I think I started falling the moment I saw you covered in dust behind that water trough, looking fierce and scared all at once. You're brave and smart and beautiful, and when I think about my future, all I see is you." Her breath caught in her throat. "Xavier, you don't have to say anything back." He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I just needed you to know, needed you to understand that this isn't some passing fancy for me. I'm serious about you, about us. I'm falling in love with you too." The words came out in a rush. "I tried not to. I told myself it was foolish, that I barely knew you, but my heart didn't listen." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, one hand coming up to cradle the back of her head. It was Willa's first real kiss, and it was everything the novels said it should be and more. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he whispered. "What?" she jerked back, certain she had misheard. "Marry me." He was serious, no trace of teasing in his face. "I know it's fast, but I don't see the point in waiting when I'm already certain. I want to build that ranch with you. I want to see you dance every Saturday night for the rest of our lives. I want to wake up next to you and fall asleep holding you and fill a house with our children. Say yes, Willa. Please say yes." She should have been cautious, should have demanded time to think, to consider all the practical implications, but caution had never brought her anything but loneliness. So instead, she threw her arms around his neck and said, "Yes. Yes, I'll marry you." His whoop of joy startled a flock of crows from a nearby tree, sending them wheeling into the sky. He picked her up and spun her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her again, deeper this time, and Willa felt that same sensation of flying that she had experienced on the dance floor. Like gravity had no hold on her anymore, like anything was possible. They told her father that evening, and Walter Zimmerman cried openly, pulling them both into a fierce hug. "Your mother would have loved you," he told Xavier, "and she would have been so happy to see Willa so happy." The wedding was planned for 6 weeks later, enough time to have a dress made and for Xavier to finish building the small cabin on the piece of land he had been saving up to buy. It was located in a beautiful valley about 15 miles from Tucumcari, with a clear stream running through it and grass that grew thick and green even in the heat of summer. Xavier took Willa out to see it one Sunday, and she fell in love with it immediately. "It's perfect," she breathed, standing in the middle of what would be their front room. The cabin was small, just 3 rooms, but it was solidly built and filled with light from the large windows Xavier had installed. "I can see us here. I can see our whole life." "You haven't even seen the best part yet." He grabbed her hand and pulled her outside, around to the back of the cabin where a small wooden platform stood under a massive cottonwood tree. "I built us a dance floor, so on warm evenings we can come out here and dance under the stars." Tears pricked at Willa's eyes. "You did that for me. I'd do anything for you." He pulled her onto the platform, humming a waltz under his breath as he led her in a slow circle. "Every day with you is like dancing, Willa. You make me feel like I'm flying." "That's what you did for me," she said, resting her head against his chest. "That first night at the church when you led me onto the floor. I was terrified, but you made me feel safe. You made me feel like I could do anything." They swayed together in the afternoon sunlight, no music except Xavier's low humming and the rustle of leaves overhead. Willa closed her eyes and memorized the moment, knowing she would carry it with her forever. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a flurry of activity. Martha Collins and several other women from town helped Willa sew her wedding dress, a simple but elegant creation of cream-colored silk that her father had special ordered from Santa Fe. Xavier worked from dawn until dusk finishing the cabin, building furniture, preparing everything for their life together. In the evenings, he would come to town and they would steal whatever moments they could, walking hand in hand through the streets or sitting on the store porch talking until the stars came out. There were practical matters to attend to as well. Walter decided to hire a young man from town to help with the store, so Willa would be free to focus on her own household. Xavier brought horses to the cabin, good sturdy animals that would be the foundation of the breeding program he hoped to build. They made lists of supplies they would need, planned a garden, discussed where the barn should go. But beneath all the practical planning, there was a current of joy that never stopped flowing. Xavier brought Willa wildflowers picked from the meadow. She baked him apple pie using her mother's recipe. They laughed at silly things and dreamed out loud about the future. He taught her to ride properly, and she taught him how to read better, sitting together in the evenings while she patiently helped him work through the books she had loved as a child. "I never had much schooling," he admitted one night, stumbling over a particularly difficult passage. "My family needed me working, so I left after just a few years. You're doing wonderfully." Willa traced the line of text with her finger. "Besides, reading is just like dancing. It gets easier with practice." He smiled at that, pulling her into his lap. "Everything's like dancing with you around." "You've made my whole world into a dance, Willa Zimmerman." "Soon to be Willa Pritchard," she corrected, kissing the tip of his nose. "Not soon enough." He groaned dramatically. 6 weeks felt like nothing when we set the date, but now every day drags by like a year. Be patient, Cowboy." She laughed at his pained expression. "It'll be here before you know it." But 2 weeks before the wedding, disaster struck. A telegram arrived from Fort Worth with news that Xavier's father had taken seriously ill. His mother begged him to come home, saying the doctors were not sure the old man would last much longer. "I have to go," Xavier told Willa, his face twisted with anguish. "I know the timing is terrible, but he's my father. I can't let him die without saying goodbye." "Of course you have to go." Willa took his face in her hands. "Family is important. I understand that better than anyone. Come with me." The words tumbled out urgently. "We'll get married before we go, just a quick ceremony at the church. Then you'll be my wife and I won't have to leave you behind." "Xavier, we can't." The dress isn't finished and the cabin needs work and everyone is expecting a proper wedding. I don't care about any of that. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. I just care about you, about us. I don't want to be apart from you, Willa. These past weeks have been the happiest of my life, and the thought of spending even a few days without you makes me feel like I can't breathe. She understood exactly what he meant. The idea of him leaving, even temporarily, felt like losing a part of herself. But marriage was not something to rush into just because of fear or circumstances. How long would you be gone? A week, maybe 2 at most. Just long enough to see my father settle some affairs if the worst happens. His hands tightened on her shoulders. But it feels like forever. Then we'll make it shorter. Willa straightened, making a decision. I'll come with you, but not as your wife. Not yet. We'll travel as friends with proper chaperones. Martha Collins has family in Fort Worth. I'm sure she'd agree to come along and lend us respectability. Xavier started to argue, then saw the determination in her face and nodded. All right. If that's what you want, that's what we'll do. But the minute we get back, we're getting married. I don't care if the dress is finished or not. Martha did agree to accompany them, seeming delighted by the adventure. They left 2 days later on the morning stage. The 3 of them crammed into the coach with 6 other passengers and more luggage than should have been physically possible to fit in such a small space. The journey to Fort Worth took 4 days of bone-rattling travel over rough roads, stopping at way stations to change horses and grab quick meals. Willa had never been so far from Tucumcari, and despite the discomfort and her worry over Xavier's father, she found herself fascinated by everything they passed. The landscape changed gradually, the dry New Mexico plains giving way to the slightly greener hills of Texas. Small towns appeared and disappeared. She saw things she had only read about: a herd of wild mustangs, a band of Comanche traders, an actual train thundering past on parallel tracks. Xavier sat across from her, their knees touching in the cramped space, and told her stories about growing up in Fort Worth. His family had a small ranch on the outskirts of town, nothing fancy but enough to get by. He was the youngest of 4 boys, and from the way he talked about his brothers, it was clear they had been wild and rambunctious, always getting into some kind of trouble. Pa used to say we'd be the death of him, Xavier said with a sad smile. Guess he might have been right. Don't say that. Willa reached across and squeezed his hand, not caring that Martha and the other passengers could see. He's going to pull through. You'll see. But when they finally arrived at the Pritchard ranch, it was clear that Xavier's father was indeed very ill. Thomas Pritchard lay in the main bedroom, his face gray and his breathing labored. Xavier's mother, a small, fierce woman named Ellen, clutched her youngest son and wept. You made it in time, she said through her tears. He's been holding on, waiting for you. Xavier spent hours at his father's bedside, talking to him in low voices, holding his weathered hand. Willa stayed out of the way, helping Ellen with the cooking and cleaning, meeting Xavier's brothers as they arrived one by one. They were all older than Xavier, all married with families of their own, and they welcomed her warmly once they understood she was their brother's intended. He wrote to us about you, the oldest brother, Daniel, told her as they stood in the kitchen preparing dinner. Said he'd met the woman he was going to marry, that she was smart and beautiful and made him feel like he could do anything. I thought he was exaggerating, but now that I've met you, I see he was telling the truth. Your brother is the one who's special. Willa stirred the pot of stew, watching through the window as Xavier chopped wood in the yard. Even here, in the midst of grief and worry, he was thinking of others, making sure his mother had enough firewood to last. He taught me to dance, you know. I'd never danced before, but he led me so gently, made me feel safe. And when we were moving together, I felt like I was flying." Daniel smiled. "That's Xav for you. Always could make people feel special. Pa used to say he had a gift for seeing the best in folks." Thomas Pritchard held on for 3 more days, long enough to meet Willa and give his blessing to their marriage. "You take care of my boy," he whispered to her when she sat with him one afternoon while Xavier slept. "He's got a good heart, but he needs someone steady to keep him grounded." "I will," Willa promised, tears streaming down her face. "I'll love him and care for him for the rest of my life." The old man smiled. "I can see why he loves you. You've got strength in you, girl, strength and sweetness both." He closed his eyes, his breathing evening out. "I'm glad he won't be alone." Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep that night, surrounded by his wife and sons. The funeral was held 2 days later, a simple service attended by half of Fort Worth. Xavier stood dry-eyed through the ceremony, his jaw tight and his shoulders rigid. But when they lowered the coffin into the ground and the first shovelful of dirt hit the wood with a hollow thump, he broke. Willa pulled him into her arms, and he wept against her shoulder while she held him and murmured wordless comfort. They stayed in Fort Worth for another week, helping Ellen sort through Thomas's affairs and make decisions about the ranch. It was decided that Daniel, the oldest, would take over running the place, with the other brothers helping out. Xavier's share of the inheritance was a modest sum of money and a dozen of the best horses from his father's breeding stock. "Pa always said you had an eye for horseflesh," Ellen told her youngest son as they loaded the horses into a rented corral for the trip back to New Mexico. "He'd want you to have these to start your own place proper." "I'll make him proud, Ma," Xavier hugged his mother fiercely. "I'll build something good, something that'll last." "I know you will," Ellen turned to Willa. "You take care of him here. He acts tough, but he feels things deep." "I know." Willa embraced the older woman. "I'll love him the way you loved his father, I promise." The journey back to Tucumcari was quieter than the trip out. Martha dozed in the corner of the coach while Xavier stared out the window, his expression distant. Willa let him have his silence, understanding that he needed time to process his grief. But she kept her hand in his, a constant reminder that he was not alone. It was not until they were almost home, the familiar outline of Tucumcari visible in the distance, that Xavier finally spoke. "Thank you." "For what?" "For being there. For not trying to make it better or telling me everything would be okay. For just being with me." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "I don't know how I would have gotten through this without you. You'll never have to find out." Willa leaned her head on his shoulder. "From now on, we face everything together." "Together," he echoed, and some of the tension finally left his body. They were married 3 days after returning to Tucumcari. Willa wore her cream silk dress, and Xavier wore a new black suit that he would normally have saved for his father's funeral. But Ellen had insisted he buy something for his wedding, saying Thomas would have wanted him to celebrate life even in the midst of mourning. The ceremony was held at the church where they had first danced together, with what felt like the entire town in attendance. Walter Zimmerman walked his daughter down the aisle, his eyes swimming with tears. Martha Collins served as matron of honor, dabbing at her face with a handkerchief. And when the preacher asked if Xavier would take Willa to be his lawfully wedded wife, his "I do" rang out clear and strong, filling the small building. "I do," Willa echoed when it was her turn, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. They kissed as husband and wife, and the congregation erupted in cheers. Someone started playing a fiddle, and before Willa knew what was happening, Xavier was leading her into a dance right there in the church aisle. Everyone laughed and clapped as they spun together, and Willa felt that familiar sensation of weightlessness, of flying. Only this time, it was even better because Xavier was not just her dance partner anymore. He was her husband, her partner in everything. The reception was held at the church hall, with tables groaning under the weight of food that people had brought. There was music and laughter, and so much joy that Willa thought her heart might burst from it all. She danced with her father, with Xavier's friends from the Parker Ranch, with seemingly every man in Tucumcari. But always, she came back to Xavier, and they would sway together while everyone around them faded into the background. As the evening wore on and the stars came out, Xavier pulled her outside. "I have a wedding present for you." "Xavier, we agreed no presents. Getting married is enough." "Well, I'm breaking the rules." He led her around to where a wagon waited, already loaded with their belongings. "Everyone in town helped me finish it while you were getting ready this morning. The cabin is completely done, Willa. Furniture built, shelves stocked, everything ready. I want to take my wife home tonight." Home. The word settled over her like a warm blanket. Not her father's store or the room she had grown up in, but a new home, their home. "Then let's go." They said their goodbyes quickly, accepting hugs and well wishes from everyone. Walter held Willa extra long, whispering, "Be happy, pumpkin. You deserve every bit of happiness." "I love you, Papa." "I love you too. Now go. Start your new life." The ride to the cabin took about an hour, Xavier driving the wagon while Willa sat beside him, her hand resting on his thigh. The moon was nearly full, painting the landscape in shades of silver and shadow. Neither of them spoke much, content just to be together, but the silence was comfortable, full of promise. When they finally arrived at the cabin, Xavier insisted on carrying Willa over the threshold despite her laughing protests. He set her down gently in the middle of their front room, and she turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. Someone had lit lanterns throughout the space, casting everything in a warm glow. There were curtains on the windows, rugs on the floor, a rocking chair by the fireplace that she recognized as having belonged to Xavier's mother. "Ma sent it," Xavier explained, seeing where she was looking. "Said every home needs a good rocking chair for when the babies come." Babies. The word sent a thrill through Willa. She had not let herself think too much about that aspect of marriage, had been too busy with preparations and worry over Xavier's father. But now, standing in their home with her husband beside her, the future suddenly felt very real and very close. Xavier seemed to read her thoughts. He stepped closer, cupping her face in his hands. "We don't have to rush anything. I know you're probably tired and we've been through a lot these past weeks." "I'm not tired." Willa rose on her toes and kissed him, putting everything she felt into it. All her love and hope and desire. "I'm your wife, Xavier Pritchard, and I want to start our marriage properly." He needed no further encouragement. He kissed her deeply, his hands moving to the buttons at the back of her dress. She helped him, fingers fumbling slightly with nerves and anticipation. They undressed each other slowly, reverently, taking time to explore and discover. And when Xavier finally led her to their bed, Willa did not feel scared or uncertain. She felt cherished, desired, completely safe in his arms. Their lovemaking was gentle and awkward and perfect, exactly what a wedding night should be. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Xavier tracing lazy patterns on Willa's bare shoulder while she listened to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," he murmured into her hair. "More than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone." "I love you too." Willa kissed his chest. "Thank you for teaching me to dance, for showing me that life could be more than just responsibility and duty. Thank you for saying yes, for trusting me, for being brave enough to fly." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other, and when Willa dreamed, she dreamed of dancing under endless stars. The first year of marriage was full of hard work and small joys. Xavier focused on building up the horse breeding program. working from dawn until dusk to break and train the animals his father had given him. Willa kept the house, planted a garden that flourished beyond her wildest expectations, and learned all the skills necessary for ranch life. She could ride now without fear, could shoot a rifle well enough to protect the livestock from coyotes, could birth a foal and doctor a sick horse. But no matter how tired they were, no matter how many hours of backbreaking labor they had put in, Xavier always found energy to dance with her. At least twice a week, they would go out to the wooden platform behind the cabin, and he would hum or sing while they swayed together under the cottonwood tree. Sometimes they did proper waltzes or reels. Other times, they just held each other and shuffled in slow circles. It did not matter. The point was not the dancing itself, but what it represented. The promise they had made to each other, the joy they had found together, the love that grew stronger with each passing day. Neighbors began stopping by, ranchers from the surrounding area who had heard about the young couple trying to make a go of it. They offered advice, lent tools, invited Xavier and Willa to community gatherings. Slowly, carefully, they built a network of friends and allies. The Johnsons from the neighboring ranch became particularly close. They had 3 children, and Mrs. Johnson took Willa under her wing, teaching her things about running a household in such isolated circumstances. "You're doing real well, Mrs. Johnson told Willa one afternoon as they canned vegetables together. "Lot of town girls would have given up by now, gone running back to civilization, but you've got grit." "I've got Xavier," Willa corrected. "He makes everything easier." "That's a good man you married. Anyone can see how much he loves you. Why, just yesterday he was telling my Henry about building you that dance floor and the way his face lit up." She shook her head, smiling. "That's the kind of love that lasts." It did last. Through harsh winters and dry summers, through setbacks and small victories, through all the ordinary struggles of building a life together. Xavier's horse breeding program began to gain a reputation for quality, and soon he was selling to buyers from as far away as Colorado. The money was not extravagant, but it was steady, enough to expand the cabin and buy more land. And then, about 18 months after their wedding, Willa realized she was pregnant. She waited to be sure before telling Xavier, wanting to be absolutely certain. But when she finally shared the news one evening as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He whooped with joy, picked her up and spun her around despite her laughing protests, then immediately set her down and fretted that he might have hurt the baby. "You didn't hurt anything," Willa assured him, wiping happy tears from her cheeks. "The baby is fine. I'm fine. Everything is absolutely perfect. We're having a baby." Xavier said it like he could not quite believe it. "You and me, we're going to be parents. Are you happy?" She knew it was a silly question. His joy was written all over his face, but she needed to hear him say it. "Happy doesn't even begin to cover it." He pulled her into his arms, resting his hand over her still flat belly. "I'm terrified and thrilled and so in love with you I can barely stand it. We're going to have a family, Willa. A real family." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Willa felt tired and sick for the first few months, but Xavier was endlessly patient, bringing her ginger tea and crackers, rubbing her feet at the end of long days. As her belly grew, he became almost comically protective, trying to prevent her from doing any work whatsoever. She had to put her foot down eventually, insisting that she was pregnant, not an invalid, and that she needed to stay active. They spent the evenings planning for the baby's arrival. Xavier built a beautiful cradle out of oak wood, carving horses into the headboard. Willa sewed tiny clothes, marveling at how small they were. They argued cheerfully over names, finally settling on Thomas if it was a boy and Ellen if it was a girl, honoring Xavier's parents. Walter came out from town regularly, bringing supplies and news from Tucumcari. He was thrilled about becoming a grandfather, already planning all the things he would teach the child. The Johnsons threw a party to celebrate, inviting everyone from the surrounding ranches. Willa received so many gifts, blankets and clothes and toys, that they had to dedicate an entire chest just to storing them all. And through it all, Xavier continued to dance with her. Even when her belly was so large that she felt like a lumbering cow, even when her back ached and her ankles swelled, he would lead her out to their dance floor and hold her gently, swaying to music only they could hear. "You're still the most beautiful woman I've ever seen," he told her one evening about a week before the baby was due. "More beautiful now than ever. I'm fat as a house." But she smiled as she said it, secure in his love. "You're carrying our child. You're growing our family inside you." "That's not fat, Willa. That's a miracle." He placed his hand over her belly and the baby kicked against his palm. "I fall more in love with you every single day." Their son was born on a clear October morning in 1885, after a labor that was long but not complicated. Mrs. Johnson served as midwife, with Xavier pacing anxiously outside until his wife's cries turned to a baby's wail. Then he burst through the door, nearly knocking over the water basin in his haste to get to them. "A boy," Willa said tiredly, cradling the red-faced, squalling infant. "We have a son." Xavier sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the baby with wonder. "He's perfect, absolutely perfect." He touched one tiny fist and the baby's fingers wrapped around his thumb. "Hello, Thomas. I'm your pa." Watching her strong, capable husband reduced to tears by the sight of their newborn son, Willa felt a surge of love so powerful it almost hurt. This was her family. This was the life she had built with the cowboy who had taught her to dance, and it was more than she had ever dared to dream. The years that followed were full and rich. Thomas grew into a sturdy, curious toddler with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined chin. Xavier's horse breeding business continued to thrive, and they were able to expand both the cabin and their herd. When Thomas was 3, Willa discovered she was pregnant again, and this time they were blessed with twin daughters whom they named Ellen and Grace. The cabin that had once seemed spacious now felt cozy and full, echoing with the sounds of children's laughter and occasional tears. Xavier proved to be a wonderful father, patient and playful, always willing to get down on the floor and play horses or build blocks. Willa managed the chaos with the same steady competence she brought to everything, though there were definitely days when she collapsed into bed exhausted. But they still danced, maybe not as often as they once had with 3 young children to care for, but Xavier made sure they found time. Sometimes it was just a few minutes stolen while the children napped. Other times, they would bring the whole family outside, and Xavier would dance with each child in turn, spinning them until they shrieked with delight, before finally claiming his wife for a proper waltz. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Willa asked one evening as they moved together under the stars, their children sleeping peacefully in the cabin. "That first dance at the church, how terrified I was, how certain I was that I would make a fool of myself. And instead you flew." Xavier pulled her closer. "I knew you would. I could see it in your eyes, all that strength and courage just waiting to be let out." "You gave me wings," Willa said softly. "Before you, I was so afraid of everything, afraid to take risks, afraid to want more than what I had. But you showed me that life could be an adventure." "We showed each other." He kissed her forehead. "You taught me that home isn't a place, it's a person. That the greatest adventure isn't riding off into the sunset alone, it's building something lasting with someone you love." They danced until the moon climbed high overhead, moving together with the easy grace of long practice. And if to outside observers, they were just a rancher and his wife taking a moment for themselves at the end of a long day. To Willa they were still flying, held aloft by love and music, and the promises they had made to each other all those years ago. Walter passed away peacefully in his sleep when Thomas was 5 and the twins were 2. It was a sorrow, but not a tragedy. He had lived to see his grandchildren, had spent countless hours teaching Thomas to read and spoiling the girls. His last words to Willa had been, "You did good, pumpkin. You built yourself a beautiful life." They buried him in the Tucumcari cemetery next to his wife, and Xavier held Willa as she wept. That night, after the children were asleep, he led her out to their dance floor without a word. They swayed together in the darkness, and gradually Willa's tears stopped. The ache in her chest remained, but it was bearable now. Because she was not alone. She had Xavier and their children and the life they had built. Her father had been right. She had done good. More years passed. Thomas grew into a tall, lanky boy who inherited his father's way with horses. The twins, as different as two people could be, nonetheless remained inseparable. Ellen was quiet and studious, always with her nose in a book. Grace was wild and reckless, forever climbing trees and getting into mischief. Xavier and Willa loved them all fiercely, parenting them as partners, united in their determination to raise good, strong, capable children. The horse breeding operation expanded further. They hired help now. Young cowboys who lived in the bunkhouse Xavier had built and worked the ranch under his supervision. Some of them stayed for years, becoming like family. The Pritchard Ranch gained a reputation not just for quality horses, but for fair dealing and honest work. People knew that Xavier's word was good as gold, and that reputation was worth more than any amount of money. When Thomas turned 15, he asked his father if he could start working the ranch full-time instead of going to school. Xavier talked it over with Willa long into the night, both of them wrestling with the decision. Finally, they agreed with the condition that Thomas continue studying in the evenings with his mother. "Education matters," Willa told her son seriously. "Your grandpa Pritchard couldn't read well and it held him back. I won't let that happen to you." "Yes, Ma," Thomas hugged her. "I'll make you proud, both of you," and he did. Thomas proved to be a natural rancher with his father's eye for horses and his mother's head for business. By the time he was 18, Xavier was already talking about turning more of the daily operations over to him, joking that he was getting too old for all the hard work. "You're only 42, Willa laughed. "That's hardly ancient." "Maybe not, but I'm feeling my age." Xavier rubbed his lower back dramatically. "All those years of breaking horses are catching up with me. Poor old man." She kissed him. "I suppose that means you're too decrepit to dance with me anymore." That got him moving. He swept her into his arms and carried her outside despite her protests, setting her down on their dance floor. It had weathered over the years, the wood silvered with age, but it was still solid. Still theirs. They danced as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. And Willa felt exactly the same as she had that very first time at the church, safe, cherished, weightless. Flying in the arms of the man who had taught her what love really meant. The twins married within a year of each other. Ellen wed a quiet schoolteacher from Santa Fe, and they settled in town where she could indulge her love of learning. Grace shocked everyone by falling for a Texas Ranger, a serious man who somehow matched her wild energy perfectly. Both weddings were beautiful, held at the ranch with dancing that lasted long into the night. Xavier danced with each of his daughters, tears streaming unashamedly down his face, before handing them over to their new husbands. "I'm not losing you," he told them. "You'll always be my girls. But I'm glad you found good men. men who'll love you the way you deserve. Thomas married a year later, bringing home a spirited young woman named Sarah who loved horses almost as much as he did. They built a house on the far side of the property, close enough to help with the ranch but far enough to have their own space. And when Sarah announced she was pregnant the following spring, Xavier and Willa looked at each other and laughed. "Grandparents," Willa said wonderingly. "When did we get old enough to be grandparents? Speak for yourself." Xavier grabbed her hand. "I'm still young enough to sweep my wife off her feet." He proceeded to prove it, dipping her dramatically on their dance floor while she laughed and clung to his shoulders. They were older now, their hair touched with gray and their bodies not quite as limber as they once were. But the love between them had only deepened with time, seasoned by years of partnership and shared joy and weathering storms together. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party. Everyone from the surrounding ranches came, along with friends from Tucumcari and even some of Xavier's family from Fort Worth. There was music and food and laughter, and at one point someone called for the couple to dance. Xavier bowed formally to Willa, offering his hand. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Pritchard?" "Always," she replied, taking it. They moved together as naturally as breathing, their bodies knowing exactly how to fit together after so many years. The crowd faded away. The music swelled. And for a few perfect moments, they were 21 and 22 again, dancing for the first time at a church social, discovering the magic of moving together. When the song ended, Xavier dipped her low and everyone cheered. But he held the pose for an extra moment, looking down at his wife with his heart in his eyes. "I love you, Willa Pritchard. Best decision I ever made was asking you to dance. Best decision I ever made was saying yes." She reached up and cupped his cheek. "You taught me to fly, Xavier. And I've been soaring ever since." They grew old together on the ranch, watching their grandchildren play in the same meadows where their own children had run. Thomas took over running the place entirely, proving himself more than capable, while Xavier settled into semi-retirement. He still worked with the horses most days, unable to give it up entirely, but he also made time for other things. Reading with Willa on the porch, teaching his grandchildren to ride, and always dancing with his wife. As they entered their 60s, Willa's joints began to ache with arthritis, and Xavier developed a troublesome cough that the doctor could not seem to cure. They slowed down, accepting the limitations of aging bodies even as their spirits remained young, but they adapted. When dancing became too difficult for Willa's knees, Xavier installed a porch swing, and they would sit there together in the evenings, holding hands and swaying gently while he hummed old songs. "You ever regret it?" Willa asked one twilight evening, watching their latest grandchild toddle across the yard. "Choosing me, choosing this life, you could have had an easier path." "Easier isn't better." Xavier squeezed her hand. "You gave me everything that matters, Willa. A home, a family, a reason to get up every morning. I choose you again in a heartbeat. I choose you every time." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they swayed together on the porch swing, still dancing in their own way, still flying, even if their feet stayed firmly on the ground now. Xavier passed away on a cold December morning just after his 70th birthday, the cough that had plagued him finally winning. He died peacefully in his sleep, lying next to the woman he had loved for nearly 5 decades. Willa woke to find him gone, and though her heart shattered, there was comfort in knowing he had not suffered, had not been afraid. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, the place he had always said had the best view in all of New Mexico. The entire community turned out for the funeral, testament to the life he had lived and the people he had touched. Willa stood dry-eyed through the service, accepting condolences with grace. But when everyone had gone and she was alone at the graveside, she finally let herself weep. "Thank you," she whispered to the fresh-turned earth. "Thank you for teaching me to dance. Thank you for showing me what love really is. Thank you for every single day." The wind picked up, rustling through the grass, and for just a moment Willa could have sworn she heard music. She closed her eyes and swayed slightly, feeling Xavier's arms around her one last time. Flying with him, just as she had that very first night. Willa lived another 8 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She remained sharp and engaged until the very end, still reading voraciously, still dispensing wisdom and love in equal measure. On warm evenings, family members would find her sitting on the old dance floor behind the cabin, humming softly to herself and moving her hands as if dancing with an invisible partner. "Who are you dancing with, Grandma?" one of her great-grandchildren asked. "Your great-grandpa, Xavier," Willa replied with a smile. "He may not be here anymore, but we're still dancing. We'll always be dancing." She died peacefully in her sleep on a spring morning, surrounded by wildflowers and birdsong. Her children buried her next to Xavier on the hill, and if anyone noticed that she seemed to be smiling in her coffin, they did not mention it. Perhaps she was dreaming of dancing. Perhaps she was already flying, reunited with her cowboy at last. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through generations. The cabin was carefully maintained, kept as a kind of shrine to Xavier and Willa. And the old dance floor behind the house, though weathered and worn, was never removed. Sometimes, on clear nights when the wind was just right, people swore they could hear music drifting from it, and if you looked closely, you might see 2 shadows moving together under the cottonwood tree. But that was just a story, the kind that grows up around places where great love once lived. What was real was the legacy Xavier and Willa left behind: a thriving ranch, a large and loving family, and the knowledge that even the most ordinary life can become extraordinary when you find someone to dance with. Someone who leads you gently and makes you feel like you are flying. Someone who teaches you that love is not just a feeling but a choice you make every single day, in 1,000 small ways, for the rest of your life. Their great-great-grandchildren still told stories about them, about the cowboy and the shopkeeper's daughter who fell in love at a church social. About how she had never danced before, but he taught her, leading her so carefully and sweetly that she felt like she was soaring. About how they built a life together filled with hard work and joy and enduring love. About how they danced together for 50 years and then kept dancing even after death separated them. It was a good story, a true story, the kind of story that reminded people what really mattered in life, not wealth or fame or adventure, though those had their place. What mattered was finding someone who saw you, really saw you, and loved you anyway. Someone who took your hand and said, "Trust me, follow my lead, I will not let you fall." Someone who gave you wings and then spent the rest of their life helping you fly. That was what Xavier gave to Willa and what she gave back to him. And in the end, it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.